Hey there, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Just wanted to chat with you today about one of the really unifying reasons that brings us all together within this group, the Comeback Queen, and that really is about trauma. That's one of the things that whether it's a trauma or a major life change. That's why we are talking about plotting our comeback and really taking a look at the healing process and everything that needs to come into play when we go through the many stages of healing from trauma and the many stages of really bouncing back and plotting our comeback and coming back stronger and more fierce than we were before, depending on what it was that we went through. So I wanted to come on. Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching. I wanted to come on and chat a little bit about really, number one, what trauma is all about and all of the layers and stages. And when we all know that the trauma can affect us differently, right? There can be, a difficult childhood that we may have gone through where we suffered abuse or neglect or other things like that start us off with, different painful experiences that we've internalized. We can also experience repeated trauma over years if we've been in abusive relationships or if we've struggled with really not feeling like we can fully live as who we are in our lives. That's one other way. And then, of course, we can experience trauma from a single devastating experience, whether that is an accident, sometimes that can be a loss. There's so many different ways that trauma can affect us. So we need to look at that, and then we also need to look at the different stages of where we can be at in the healing process. So I wanted to go through all of that in this video today because most importantly, the reason that I have created this group, the reason that I want to talk about this is that I want to help support anyone who is ready for the healing process. Now, depending on what stage we are at, whether the trauma has just happened to us or if this is something that happened to us years ago, having an awareness of what stage we're at can really, really help us. Number one, seek out the proper support and care, but also just really realize how gentle we need to be on ourselves, depending on what it is that we've been through. The reason I say that is I know from personal experience, I went through, quite a traumatic time a couple of years ago around my pregnancy and around the birth or the upcoming birth of my daughter, where her father ended up being deported. And that was something that, of course, created a lot of stress in my life. I was also quite sick at the time and I couldn't work. So I had a lot of stress and fear about what was going to happen, how I was going to be able to raise this baby and be able to support us, right? So that was, I guess more of a long-term trauma that I experienced. But in the moment, in order to survive, I downplayed what I was going through. I couldn't actually really take on the gravity of what was going on. And so that was one of the ways that I really coped with that and one of the ways that I really survived that particularly traumatizing time. I mean, I've been through, as I mentioned earlier, the different types of trauma we can experience. I experienced quite significant bullying throughout most of my childhood that really affected my confidence and my ability to really I ended up going quite internal and couldn't really I was very painfully shy as a result of that. And it wasn't until my late 20s, my early 30s that I was able to start to overcome that. So there was that type of trauma. And then, as I mentioned, we can have traumatic experiences that are just one single incident. So for me, that is going through several miscarriages in my life. And then, of course, being through more long-term traumatic experiences. I mentioned the pregnancy, but I've also been through several emotionally abusive relationships as well. So the reason I mention all of that as well is just to say that, we can have layers of trauma upon trauma that we experience. And I think one of the most important things is, again, identifying what stage we're at, getting really, really clear on that, and then reaching out for that support when we're ready, and we may not necessarily be ready in the moment. So what I wanted to chat a little bit today about is the cycle of healing of trauma and the stages of trauma. And also I wanted to chat about how to create your own roadmap to your own comeback. And that's the exciting part of all of this, is as we get to the stage where we're ready to rebuild and we're ready to heal, we get to decide. And I think that's one of the great things about, when we've been through something that really shows us what we don't want in our lives, especially if it was a long-term abusive relationship. We have the opportunity now to rebuild and to be really, really clear on what we desire within our lives. And when we heal, we heal something within ourselves so that we end up choosing differently down the road. We value ourselves more. We realize that we won't tolerate the abuse. So that's one example, right? I mean, there's certain traumatic experiences that just happen to us, and there's no real rhyme or reason for why it happens. It just happens. And of course, again, it's coming to terms with what can happen to us. So again, the topic of trauma is multi-layered, it's complex, but overall there is a cycle of trauma healing. And this is something I wanted to share with you. This is from a psychologist named Dr. Kraybell, and she's created a really clear path to healing. So it kind of takes away all of the complicated layers, as I was talking about. And it's important to, again, have this framework so that you can identify where you are in your traumatic healing, and you can also start to get really, really clear on what the next steps are for you for healing. So assuming that a person has not had any trauma in their lives, and they're going through their lives, and then it's just regular routine, everything is normal. Of course, this framework is a little bit more specific to one single devastating incident, but we can use this framework and we can make it work for the other types of trauma that I described. So whether that was long-term childhood trauma or a long-term experience of trauma, those would be examples of an abusive relationship, or also not feeling like you can actually fully be who you are. You're not comfortable in your own skin for various reasons, or you don't feel like you are safe to fully express who you are because of potential things that you've been through. So there's an event that happens. There's a traumatizing event that happens. We've been going about our lives, everything is normal, and then something happens, or it happens repeatedly over time. What happens is that there's an injury that really happens within ourselves, within our psyche, and it activates survivor mode in our brain and in our body. And what happens is we get into a response. We either go into, these are sort of like the base responses in our brain, that really just kick in when we get into the survivor mode. And of course, we know it's fight, flight, or freeze. Those are the three possible things. So we may have just experienced trauma. We may be in those states right now. And at that point, we really can't deal with anything. I mean, we're not ready to heal. We're just in shock. We're in the shock of what happened. And this is a natural, process that our body goes through. And it's there to protect us in the immediate term, right? But then we have to go and take a look at what happens, in the weeks, months, and years following that trauma, and really ideally looking at how we're going to heal. So the next stage that happens after that is withdrawal. So withdrawal after trauma, and it is a survival response, and it can last weeks, months, years. It can even last a lifetime if we don't ever get to the stage of healing. It says instability is typical as the survivor cycles through shock, denial, fear, anger, shame, guilt, moral injury, and on and on and on. All of the different things that we can experience when we go through something that's traumatic. We can blame ourselves. we can experience shame where we don't want to talk about it, or we don't want to even really take on the gravity of what's happened. As I described that happened to me, a couple of years ago when I went through that really difficult time. So again, we can be in withdrawal for a really, really long time. And it's important when we are ready to identify that we're at that stage. And that ends up being the next stage. And that's the stage of awareness. So it's as we get a deeper and deeper knowledge of ourself, the context of what happened, the dynamics of the trauma, so that we can start to move from withdrawal into awareness. And really at that point, that's when we acknowledge the depth of loss and grieving truly begins. So again, we can be in the withdrawal stage for a really, really long time before we fully accept what's happened to us. And that's a really important stage for us. So as you're listening to this, depending on what you've been through, it's something to really think about. And I think most of us that are in this group, because as I go through and meet people and start to invite them to this group, as you may have been invited to this group, and we have this discussion, there are people that sometimes are actually triggered by me inviting them into this group. And that's how I know they're not ready, right? When we're actually ready to heal, we're usually at that awareness stage to really acknowledge, obviously, that we've been through trauma and we're ready to take those steps. And the next step is action, as I mentioned. So it's really starting to really take a look at what is needed and all of the different layers of who we are as human beings, everything from our physical well-being. After we've been through trauma, our eating patterns change, our sleep patterns change, we experience anxiety, we experience all sorts of adverse symptoms, things that we don't want. We can have digestive issues from the anxiety and from the stress. And so, those are some of the important physical layers of healing. But then there's also taking a look at our emotional well-being, our mental well-being, our psychological well-being, and our spiritual well-being as well. Because when we go through trauma, we can often disconnect or disengage spiritually from our faith, from our belief in a higher power as well. And that in and of itself can become an injury if we're not connected in that way. And if we don't feel that deep self-love and that deep support from a higher power, that can also create, a painful experience. The next stage is integration. And that's at, the stage that I really love to support my clients is when we're starting to really get clear on, what the next steps are, rebuilding, reintegrating, and creating that. The roadmap started earlier on, but it's sort of the implementation of the roadmap, if you will. So it's when we're getting to that stage of really rebuilding and really putting the pieces back together, but also using what happened from the past and allowing that to help catapult us towards what it is that we want. This is where we can really start to fully and deeply appreciate everything about who we are and really learn to harness that deep self-love and spirituality so that we can move forward and so that we can heal and that we can choose differently. And again, sometimes, depending on the type of trauma, it's something that could have just happened to us, like an accident or, an illness. But if it's trauma related to a relationship, we're of course wanting to really identify and get clear on choosing something better for ourselves down the road and just being really, really clear on what we will and won't tolerate in our lives. So again, this is a really big topic, but it's an important one, and it's really at the core of why we're here in this Comeback Queen group. Because as we're working together within this group and as we are focusing on our own individual healing, the awareness stage that I mentioned, the action stage that I mentioned, and the integration stage are all really, really hugely important and plotting your own comeback and really designing your life in a way that really suits you. So it becomes an opportunity to heal in a way that propels you forward, in a way that allows you to really get in touch with your purpose and your soul gifts. I just had a low battery on my phone, sorry. And really start to forge ahead in your power. And so that's what I wish for every single woman in this group. And it's what I am here to support you in, depending on what stage you're at. So what I'm offering for anyone that's interested and ready is a clarity session. Now, the booking link for these clarity sessions are on the post. And really what it is a free call where we can chat about what stage you're at and where you are in your own roadmap, and I can help support you in plotting your roadmap to your comeback. So that's what that's all about. I would love to chat with you about, anything that you want to chat about. I mean, that's really what I'm here for, and that's what I do, is to listen and to offer support and hold space as you are going through your own healing process. So for any of you that are watching, thank you so much for being here. Sending you lots and lots of courage and strength and love for where you are, and appreciation just for who you are. I also wanted to thank you for being here in this group. It's a place that's incredibly important to me, and I just really honor each and every one of you that is here, and just send my deep gratitude for you for being here and for watching. So again, lots of love, and don't forget to reach out if you are ready for support in planning your own and creating your own roadmap to your comeback. All right, I'll be with you again soon. Lots of love. Bye.